Bava Kamma test. The Gemara begins immediately following a Mishnah. The Gemara is going to discuss halacha found in the Mishnah, give a few halachas related to it, and ask some questions and try to determine pshat in that halacha. So the Mishnah had said, if somebody steals from his father, he has to return it, even if the father had died by the time it's time to return it, and he is the inheritor, he still has to return it. He has to give it to other inheritors. He has to give it to his father's other sons or brothers or someone else to inherit. Now, in our Gemara, the Gemara begins by saying that Rav Yosef says even if there are no other inheritors, he still has to do it. He has the mitzvah sashava and he has to return it. If there's no other inheritors and he can't give it to an inheritor, he'll give it to tzedakah. Rav Papa adds halacha, he has to say, this is the theft that I stole from my father at the time. Now the Gemara asks, why should this all be true? If he's the inheritor, let him just be Michael himself. There is no mitzvah hashava, the Gemara says, that you have to return it, and that mechila cannot absolve one of. We have a Mishnah, which we've seen earlier in the Masechta, that says that if somebody owes theft, and then there's also chaimish that he has to pay, and he can be moichel the keresh, he can be moichel the keren, the theft itself, and in that situation where he wasn't moichel the chaimish, that's what the Mishnah speaks about. But you clearly see you could be moichel the keren, and you don't have to pay it. So the concept of mechila applies, and there is no mitzvah sashava that overrides the concept of mechila. So let him just, if he's the yerush, let him just be moichel it to himself. So the Gemara will give a few answers to this. The first answer is Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says this Mishnah and our Mishnah are different in Tanaim. One is Rabbi Glili, one is Rabbi Akiva. The Machak is Rabbi Glili and Rabbi Akiva. Can a person be Michael the return of stolen objects that is owed to him himself? And the Gemara will say it's also Machak is can he return it to? Can he be Michael to others? So where do you see this Machak? Similar quotes of Brisa. The Brisa is learning a pasuk that's referring to Gzeila. The pasuk says, "V'im ein ish goyel." The Gemara understands that to mean that there is no inheritor. Lahashav ha'ashem, to return, the Gemara says ha'ashem is a stolen object, so there's no inheritor to which to return a stolen object. Elav ha'ashem ha'mushav l'Hashem la'koyin. So the pasuk says he should return it to a koyin. So the Gemara understands that means that if you have no inheritor to which to return, you return it to a koyin. Says the Brisa, how is this possible? How is there no inheritor? Everyone has an inheritor. So Gemara says it's talking about a ger. Ger is kikatan shanel dami, so he has no inheritor. And so, for example, the case would be if somebody steals from a ger and then he hears that the ger dies. So he takes the money to Yerushalayim to give it to Kahanim. Says the Brisa now, what happens if he's on the way to Yerushalayim and then he finds the ger, he's alive. And now he owes the money to him, he has to return it to him. But he turns it into a milveh. He says, okay, I owe you the money, and it's like it's a loan from you to me, and I owe it back to you as a milveh. I'm holding it on loan. Then the ger dies. He really dies this time. So the Brisa says, according to Rabbi Yaisi, the thief, who's now a borrower, is zeich in the money, because it's hefker, and he's the one who's holding it, and therefore it belongs to him. Rabbi Akiva says he has to get rid of it. He has to do a ma'aseh shava, and therefore he has to get it out from his hand. He has to find someone to give it to be l'kayim mitzvah shava. So the Gemara wants to say that Rabbi Glili therefore holds that you could be meichel to yourself. The Gemara says Rabbi Glili says that in this case he's meichel to himself, and even in case he could be meichel to others. There's no difference between the two. Rabbi Akiva would say that he can't be meichel not himself and not to others. There's no mechila. So therefore, the Mishnah which we saw before that says that there is mechila is Rabbi Glili. Our Mishnah here that says that you have to give it is Rabbi Akiva. Now, the Gemara wants to know, why does this case only speak about where he turned it into a milveh, where he made it into a loan and he became a borrower? So Gemara wants to say, lav dafka. Rabbi Glili would say it even if he was not a borrower. It's only according to Rabbi Akiva that it's a bigger chiddush. According to Rabbi Akiva, you may have thought it's only if he's a thief, he still has a mitzvah to return it, but if he turns into a borrower, he doesn't have a mitzvah to return it anymore. Rabbi Akiva would even say, even though he turned into a milveh, he still has to get rid of the gzeila from under his hands. That's Rabbi Yochanan's answer. Now the Gemara says the Rav Sheshes asks on it. Rav Sheshes asks, if it's true that Rabbi Yossi says he could be meichel in all cases, whether he's meichel to himself or he's meichel to somebody else, or someone else being meichel for him, whether it's a milveh, whether it's not a milveh. So then the Mishnah that had said the case where he's meichel on the keren, why is it talking about a case where he's being meichel to acherim? Let's say a much bigger chiddush, where he's being meichel to himself, where he's a yerush, is being meichel to himself. And that would have taught me the chiddush of being meichel acherim as a kav chaymer. And then if we want to talk about a case of meichel to Karen Menastam, so then say Rabbi Kiva Shita and say that you can't do it. And then I would learn from there that if you can't be Meichel to Acherim, you certainly can't be Meichel to yourself. So why did we not say the bigger Chiddush in each of these? Obviously then, it can't be that Rabbi Yossi holds whether you're Meichel Acherim or you're Meichel to yourself, you could be Meichel either way. So therefore, Rav Sheshes has a different shot to answer the stira in the Mishnayos. Rav Sheshes wants to say that they're both Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Yossi is mechalik between if you're being Meichel at yourself or being Meichel to someone else. So in the case of our Mishnah here, to be Meichel to yourself, you can do. And that's why the Rabbi Yossi here says in our Mishnah that you have to return it no matter what. Even though he's the Yerush, you can't be Meichel to yourself. However, to Meichel to others, you could. And that's why the case of Meichel the Karen is referring to where you're Meichel to others, or others, the Nigzals being Meichel to you, whichever one you are. Also, the case of the Ger, where it's Zakav al Milva, it's Dafka Zakav al Milva, because by making it into a Milva, what the Ger is doing is he's being Meichel the Gzela. He's turning into a Milva, he's being Meichel the Chiyav Hashavas Gzela. So that's being Meichel Acherim. The Ger is being Meichel to the Gazlan. And therefore, that's only according to Rabbi Yossi is Dafka when it's Zakav al Milva. Otherwise, he would not say so. Now, that's Rav Shesh's pshat. The Gemara quotes Rava says a different pshat. Rava wants to say, actually, both of them are Rabbi Akiva. Rava says it's really Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva is the one, he's actually the one who's mechalik between Meichel to himself and Meichel to someone else. Rabbi Yossi is not mechalik. Rabbi Yossi, the case of Zakav al Milva was Lav Dafka, you didn't have to be Zakav al Milva. Rabbi Akiva here is our Mishnah, and Rabbi Akiva is saying this Mechila is no good because it's to him himself. However, Rabbi Akiva would be Maida in the case of being Meichel to someone else, and that's good. Why does he ask the case of the Gazlan? So he learns Zakav al Milva is not a real Mechila to Acherim. It's not called a mechila. He just turned it into a milva. It wasn't really mechil the whole thing, and therefore, there Rabbi Akiva says that you have to return it because it's still considered to be gzela. However, in the case of a real nigzal to a gazlan, Rabbi Akiva would agree that it could be mechil because it's lacherim. The Gemara now asks, according to Rabbi Yossi, the way you want to learn it, that he holds you could be mechil to himself. So, what is the case that the pasuk says that if you steal from the ger, it goes to the Kahanim? Why should it ever go to the Kahanim? You're Yerush it yourself, and you can be Meichel to yourself. Why do you have to? Where is the mitzvah sashava that you have to do? In all situations, is Mechila. So Rava answers the case there is where you stole from the Ger, swore, then the Ger died before you ever admitted. Then he admitted. So the time that he admitted, the Ger was already gone, and therefore it was never the Ger's to be Meichel, never the Ger's to be Mafkir. At the time that he's Mechayev, it's already Kinyan to Shemayim, and therefore it goes to Kohanim. Gemara now goes more deeply into halachas of returning something to the ger, or if he isn't around, to the Kohanim. So Gemara asks, what about a giyaris, a woman? Does the same halacha apply? The Torah had said the imein lo ish goyel, is that dafka an ish, or even an isha, even a female giyaris. And the other side would be that the pasuk is just speaking about an ish, because that's normal, that's orchei. Generally, these halachas apply with men. So the Gemara says that Rav Aaron brought a raya to Ravina from a brisa. The brisa says ish would imply only an ish. How do you know that an ish is included as well? Because there's an extra hashava. It says ish goyel lahashiv ha'asham elav ha'asham hamushav. So lahashiv and hamushav is a repetition, and the extra hamushav is to teach another hashava, and that's even to an isha, even to a gyeris. You have to return it to the kahanim in place of her. So Mara says, what's the ish for? So the ish is not to exclude a gyeris, ish is to exclude a katan, a ger katan. And what it's teaching me is that you don't have to go look and see, does he have yarshim? A ger katan cannot possibly have yarshim, because the only yarshim he could have is children that are born after his conversion, and he's a katan, so he couldn't have any children. And the Gemara learns elsewhere that this is a right that a katan cannot have a child in his katnos. If he is an ish, though, only an ish do you have to go search and make sure he doesn't have living yarshim. Gemara now says, which kohen is it given to when he arrives? Gemara brings a brisa. It says, La Hashem la kohen, in the psukim, La Hashem la kohen. So that means that the money belongs to Hashem. It's a kinyan to Hashem, and then he has awarded it to the kohen. So it's the brisa of that mishmar, the kohen who's in service in the Beis HaMikdash at that time. The Gemara says, how do you know? Maybe it's to any kind he wants. So the Gemara says, because the pasuk says, you give it to him, Milvad el Kippur. Besides, for the carbon that you're bringing, Asher Chaper by Olav, you have to give it to him anyway. So that applies to the same person who's getting the El Kippur, which is the kind that's on duty at the time. That is the one where you're going to give this money of the Gezel Hager. Now the Gemara wants to know, what if the thief is a kohen? Can he wait till it's his mishmar and then bring it to himself and give it to himself as the kohen who's receiving it as the mishmar on duty, and he does not share with anyone else? So the Gemara wants to say, that argument sounds very good. He should be able to do that. So Gemara has two ways of explaining why he should be able to do that, and then Gemara is going to show that he can't do that. So first Gemara wants to say, if he could get someone else's things, so then he should be able to get his own things. He has more of a shaykhis to it. So if he's bringing his own gzela that he stole, he should be able to give it to himself. Gemara has a different version of the same argument. The Gemara says, compare a carbon that he's bringing to stolen objects that he's bringing. So the carbon that he's bringing doesn't belong to him. It's carbon. Now, when he brings it, he can take it himself, and he can be makabed himself, and he doesn't share it with any other members of the mishmar. Now, if something which doesn't belong to him, he takes for himself, and he doesn't share it with anybody, so this, which he has a chelik in it, it's already partially his, he's coming to pay it, certainly he should be able to keep it for himself and not have to share it with other members of the mishmar. So it's not a good comparison. The carbon, he doesn't have a chelik in it when he brings it, and neither does anyone else. So no one else has any shaykhs to sharing it, and therefore he can keep it all for himself. No one has a chelik in it. This thing, though, when it's brought, it's really brought for the entire mishmar. He's bringing it, it belongs to the mishmar completely. So they have a chelik in it just as much as he does, he shouldn't be able to stop them. So the Gemara asks, if he can't keep it for himself, but he can keep his own karbanis for himself, when he's bringing the carbon kapara for his gzela, he can keep that for himself, just like any asham or any carbon that a kohen brings for himself. Now we know that the one who's receiving the carbon should be the one receiving the money, because it says v'ishes kedashav loy yihiyu, that teaches that he can bring his own karbanis, and because it says milvad el kippur masher yichaper by, so that means that the one who's receiving it should receive the money. So here it's not going to be that way. He brings his own carbon, but he can't receive the money. So first Gemara wants us to remember we're talking about a kohen who's tamei, and therefore he can't bring the carbon himself. And that's why it has no shaykhis to him. Says Gemara, if that's true, and it doesn't have a chelik in the money either, why are we calling it something that he has a chelik in? It's like kodshim, and he has no chelik in it. So it can't be we're talking about a kohen tamei. So the Gemara answers, right, there's really a different source from the fact that the kohen can't keep it himself, and that's the word l'kohen appears here. The word l'kohen appears in the concept of dividing up a stei achuzah to kahanim. Just like over there, it can't go to one kohen specifically, it's shared by everyone. This also has to be shared by everyone. Now the halacha about a stei achuzah is that generally, if somebody sells a field, it goes back to the owner at yovel. However, if a person is makdish a field, he's supposed to redeem it. This is his inherited field. He's makdish his inherited field. He's supposed to redeem it. If he doesn't redeem it, the Gizbar of Hektish will sell it. When Yovel hits, the buyer gives it back to Hektish, and it belongs to Kahanim, and it does not go back to the owner of the Achuzah forever. So when it comes to Kahanim, how do those Kahanim receive it? So in describing that, the pasuk says, "Vaya asad b'tzeisi b'yovel kodesh l'Hashem kistei achirim l'kohen tia achuzasei." What is that achuzasei? What are we saying that that for the kohen should be the achuzasei? Just say it should belong to the kohen. Where achuzasei is extra. So Gemara says that's to teach me about a similar case where the person who bought it from the Gizbar was a kohen. And now Yovel comes, so it's being taken from him and being given to Kahanim. So this Kohen says, you know what, I'm a Kohen, I'm holding it, let me just keep it by me. Why do I have to share it with anyone else? And I'm being Kaim, the din of giving it to Kahanim. Specifically, he's the Kohen that's in the Mishmar that's in service at the time. So for there, that's why it says, Achuzasai. It says, his own Achuzah belongs to him. But this does not belong to him. This is not his Achuzah. This is something else, and therefore it's taken away from him, and it's divided up equally amongst all Kahanim.